Aziz Abu Sarah has had a distinguished international career as a Palestinian peace activist, journalist, social entrepreneur, and politician, and recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. He is co-CEO of Interact International, a nonprofit dedicated to Middle East peace. As a TED Fellow, Aziz has lectured throughout the United States and around the world. He's a former co-executive director of the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution, an arm of George Mason University's School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. With his Jewish friend Scott Cooper, he is co-founder of a dual narrative tour company called, pronounce it for me. Mejdi Tours, which offers tours for Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and I'm imagining anyone else who wants to come, on both sides in the conflict zone. And each tour is led by 2 tour guides, one Jewish, one Palestinian, with each giving their own perspective. And you took your own tour, an 8-day tour with Aziz's Israeli friend and peace activist Maoz Inon. And together, they co-wrote a book entitled, this is it, The Future of Peace, A Shared Journey Across the Holy Land, which was published this year and is a bestseller. And you and Maoz have met 2 popes, correct? 2 popes.
3 if you count John Stewart.
Pope Francis in 2024, who hugged you, and Pope Leo in 2025. And I just want to read His Holiness Pope Francis's words, which are part of the frontispiece of the book. In the face of the suffering of these 2 brothers, the suffering of these 2 nations, I have no words. They have had the courage to embrace each other. Let us pray for peace and for these 2 brothers to bring the will to work for peace to their people. I'm going to, in a few moments, leave it to you to tell your story about how you grew up and how you came to do this, your journey to this work. First, I'm going to introduce Gili Getz, who is an Israeli-American photojournalist and playwright and film producer and peace activist and lots of other hats you wear. His magnificent photography has been featured in countless organizations and publications, several books, including this book. I was particularly struck, there's a photo here that you took of Aziz and Maoz on Capitol Hill. And Aziz, you are whispering, and Maoz is leaning in to hear you. And it seems to me that symbolizes it all, right? That we need to lean in to listen and hear each other. Gil began his career as a military photographer in the IDF, and later worked as a news editor for Ynet. You are a longtime peace activist, currently serving as board president of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, which is a binational Israeli-Palestinian movement nominated twice for the Nobel Peace Prize. And you organized with the Israeli Bloc against the occupation. And after October 7th, you co-founded Israelis for Peace, advocating for the freedom, safety, dignity, and humanity of both Israelis and Palestinians. And recently, you were awarded the distinguished Trua Raphael Lemkin Human Rights Award for your work on Israeli-Palestinian peace. So I want to thank you both so much for being here, and thank also Jane Singer and Lila Strauss and Dr. Asma Rashid, who made the shidduch with us and made this possible. So we thought we would start with each of you sort of telling your story and your journey, how you got here, and then I'll ask some questions. So I don't know who wants to go first. Your call.
I'll go first. So thank you so much. What a beautiful service it was. And thank you, Rabbi Jan, thank you for the beautiful service and the beautiful words, and how appropriate it is that this holy community is named Gesher, Bridge Shul, to talk about the holy work of peacemaking, bridge building, and collective liberation that we're engaged in. So my name is Gili. I'm Israeli. It's important for me to say that after October 7 in every space that I'm Israeli. And just to say that growing as an Israeli secular person, I wanted little to do with Judaism. Honestly, I view Judaism as an oppressive force. Of what I met as an Israeli was Judaism of religious nationalism, in ultra-Orthodox. It had nothing to do with my values and my beliefs and my peace work. And it's here in America that I met Judaism that is deeply, profoundly changed who I am, deeply constructed in me Jewish identity that really is a big part of the pursuit of peace and justice and the repair that our tradition so beautifully taught us. And now I look for it in Israel, and it's growing slowly, Judaism that believes in peace and equality and freedom for all people, as you so beautifully said. I grew up in Beersheba. My dad was a politician. Politics was always part of my home. We believed in peace and all that. But I honestly didn't meet Palestinians at all. I knew very little about Palestinian experience, about Palestinian identity, people I shared the land with. And it was only during the Sheikh Jarrah protest where I first experienced what does a joint protest looks like, what it is like protesting together. And it started a journey for me that ended up with Combatants for Peace. We are a binational movement of peace activists. We organized the entirety of Israel-Palestine, and we model a movement. We host the joint memorial ceremony, which is the largest peace event in the land, with thousands and thousands of people who come to mourn together with bereaved family forum, the parent circle. And we mourn our dead together on Yom HaZikaron, the holiest, the most sacred day for Israeli Jews. But we do it together, and it grew from a very small event to a giant event, and now it's online, and I really hope you get to see it. When we learned is that if we build a place, a culture, a politics, a spaces where Israelis and Palestinians can come together and model and manifest into reality what it's like to be, what I love most about the book, Aziz, the last epilogue from the future. So we're speaking to you, as Ma'oz likes to say, from the future. Ma'oz is a very, very close friend of mine. When I first met my wife many years ago, she's here, right there, she's told me, you gotta meet this guy. You really need to meet this person. And I was like, okay, and we met, she introduced me to Ma'oz many, many years ago, and it became a really beautiful friendship. And after October 7th, a day that did destroy our ecosystem of peace building, as with all the pain and suffering, and as we built it together, three things held me together personally. One of them was Combatants for Peace. We as a movement decided to stay at the table together and work throughout this difficulty together. Our offices in Bejala was the only place where Israelis and Palestinians could meet. It wasn't without difficulty, but we believed in the vision of full equality for all people, for all of us, from these systems of oppression. And it guided us, our shared humanity. So that held me together. The second thing is we started as Israelis for Peace, a space where we can fully hold the humanity of both Israelis and Palestinians in a very binary world we find ourselves in. And I'm so happy this space is challenging the binary world where you have to be pro-Israelis or pro-Palestinians. We offer to you another path, another perspective in which to view the world and view this conflict and view your own lives. A non-binary perspectives where our freedom and future are completely, deeply, profoundly interconnected, that we won't be free or safe until Palestinians are free or safe for us as Jews. And the third thing was Ma'oz and Aziz. You guys inspired me in the darkest of times of the relationship you built publicly. Ma'oz's family came together and refused, called not to revenge October 7th, but to use this opportunity to build peace. And Aziz reached out to Maoz, you'll tell the story, but your relationship was a profound moment where we looked into despair and darkness, and you provided the light, where we can see what's possible if we just see each other as full human beings. And it was extraordinary to see, and I'm forever grateful for you. Now, this is a great honor for me personally, to talk here with my dear friend Aziz, who serves with me on the board of American Friends of Combatants for Peace. Aziz has been a pioneer, he's super modest. He's been a pioneer of this work, innovating, building bridges in impossible places. It takes political imagination, innovation, belief in humanity, and courage. Courage to believe that another reality is possible, a reality you have manifested for our entire ecosystem. We are, both of us, part of a larger ecosystem we hope to talk about a little bit later, of Israelis and Palestinians who no longer believe in us versus them, who no longer believe in separation, who believe that together we'll be free and safe if we do it and build it for people to see and come enjoy. So, brother.
Thank you. I should not have let you go first. First, I want to say that the description of being modest, my wife would definitely not agree with. But I appreciate it. The way I often describe Gili to people when I want them to meet him in New York is, if you're going to New York and you want to meet the Peacemaker's mayor, you meet Gili. If you want to know what's happening in New York on peacemaking level, there's only one person you have to call. And I think, to me, this is terrible to say here, but I was not a fan of New York for many years. I lived for a while in Washington, D.C., and people in New York get mad when I tell them this, until we developed our friendship. And now I'm in New York almost every month, and I like coming to New York, which is very different than it used to be, and I like coming to see you and to see Yael, and to be engaged in the work we are doing. I'm very grateful for everything you're doing in New York and for the vision you're providing. And thank you for having us here, and for Leila and Jane and Asma, thank you for making this happen. I've been involved in this work of peacemaking since I was 18 years old, so a couple of years now. Not a good joke? Okay. It's over 25-ish years. And I did not grow up as somebody who believed in peacemaking. My brother was killed when I was 10 years old by Israeli soldiers. I grew up very angry, very bitter, and very much looking and seeking for revenge. Because it feels like when somebody hurts you, that the natural thing to do, the only thing how we should respond is by the anger, by wanting vengeance. And that's what I did for 8 years, from the time I was 10 years old to the time I was 18 years old. And then when I was 18, I went to study Hebrew in an ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to learn Hebrew. And that was the first time I met an Israeli Jew, who treated me like a human being. And that shifted everything in my life. And from that kind of moment, and it's a longer, obviously, conversation and transformation, but from that moment, it set me up on this route of peacemaking. And through this journey, I had to learn a lot of things. And through it, I started figuring out that there's more than one way to be a peacemaker. Innovation, travel, media, which you do a lot, Gili. And there's different paths to do that. Starting Mejdi was exactly this idea. It's like, okay, not everybody's going to come to a gathering for peace, so maybe we can get them on a journey. Well, if they don't want to go to Israel and Palestine, maybe we'll take them somewhere else, and slowly you get them to Israel and Palestine. Although we do dual narrative in Washington, D.C., which apparently is way harder than doing it in Israel and Palestine. Having a Republican and a Democrat talk to each other is the hardest job I've ever had to do. But through that journey, I ended up also meeting Maoz, that Gili just mentioned. Maoz and I worked in travel together, but didn't know each other. And almost 3 years ago now, I got a call from a friend who told me about that Maoz's parents were killed on October 7th. And it was very difficult to decide, do I send him a message or not? Not because should I send him a message or not. I knew I should. But in times of suffering, and when you just have lost family members, is the first person you want to hear from someone you associate with those who killed your parents. And I went back and forth with myself trying to decide, is this the right time? And I decided eventually that it was the right time. Not to expect any response, but to send a message and say, this is important to show empathy in this moment. And I sent that message, not expecting a response. I didn't send it only to Maoz, I sent it to a few other people who also lost family members that I knew, some of those people who worked with me. And I was surprised. I immediately got a response back, the same day. And then a few days later, Maoz was on television speaking about how he's not seeking revenge, and then he was crying. And the interviewer asked him, why are you crying? Is it, I'm sorry, because of your parents? And he said, no, I'm not crying for my parents. I'm not only crying for my parents. I'm crying for the people being killed in Gaza. And that reciprocity of empathy is something so powerful. And in times like these, sometimes it can be very hard to see. People become very tribal, and it's not about what's right and what's wrong. It's not about what's just and what's not. It's not about equality. It becomes about my people versus yours. And I think what Gili and I and Maoz and others with us are doing is saying this definition of my people versus yours has to change. Because actually, even in the Bible, I was looking as I was reading the parasha this morning, and it reminded me of the whole curses and blessings, and it made it clear it's not, oh, you Jewish, therefore you can come in the land. They say, here's the expectation, here are some values. And then I go to my favorite part of the Bible, which is the prophets. And the book of Isaiah, especially in chapter 58, it talks about what kind of values God wants. And these are very similar values for Muslims, for Christians, for Jews. And what does it talk about? Justice. Helping the oppressed, helping the widows, helping the orphans, helping people who are hungry. It doesn't talk about they must be your religion, your ethnicity, your people, whatever it is. The values transcends all of that. And so when we come together and say, our people, it's those who believe in those values. And so we continue to say what divides us is not Israeli versus Palestinian, a Jew versus an Arab, a black versus a white, but really what divides us is those of us who believe in justice and equality and peace, and those who don't yet. And that's our work, is how do we grow this tent to create this new tribe of Jews and Muslims and Christians and atheists and Hindus and whatever other groups who would want to join. And I'll end with just saying, since we're in a service, that both in Hebrew, in Judaism, and in Arabic, in Islam, the name of God is peace. Shalom, as-salam. Actually, in Arabic, God has 99 names. And those names, often it's a thing and it's opposite. God can be both, except with very few ones. And one of those is as-salam, peace. God is not jihad, and God is not war. It's not two of the names of God. He is shalom, he is peace. And so when people who are especially religious say that they don't believe peace is possible, when we show them the book and we say the future is peace, and they say, this is naive. And I go, and you say you believe in God, right? And yeah, absolutely, I'm a true, God is the reason I don't believe in peace. Well, God's name is peace. How can you not believe in peace and still believe in God? It does not match in any way. That is the name of God. If you say peace is impossible, then you're saying God is impossible. And if you say peace is possible or is the future, you're saying God is possible. And so this is also the message we are spreading. Thank you.
Thank you.
very event is happening in a church, a Jewish service, and it was possible because of a Muslim connection that was made after we spoke at the Muslim Center. Asma, thank you so much, here in the Hamptons. That's the work of peace. The interconnectivity of it all is undeniable. It's part of the reality, despite of anyone's views. And what's beautiful about peace work is when we center it at humanity, in faith, in the divine, in peace, miracles are possible. And just thank you for the space and how it came to be.
Thank you. As long as you mention that, I should mention that our hosts from the Queen of the Most Holy Rosary Church are here. Thank you for being here. Dr. Asma Rashid is here. And your comment about God reminds me, there's a fabulous interpretation of the Hebrew word shamayim, right, which is heavens, which is that it's a combination of eish and mayim, of fire and water, which are incompatible. And in the heavens, right, for God, they're not incompatible, right? The incompatible can live together. So I actually wanted to start, you'll forgive me for being a little cheeky, I want to start with a question that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds, and that I don't want you to answer. I'm going to tell you why I don't want you to answer, okay? The question that I think is on people's minds, and I want to get it out of the way, is, we have these lovely discussions about peace, and then the question is, well, what is it actually going to look like, right? How are we going to, what's your vision for what's the political solution? And I know, Aziz, you talk about that in the book somewhat, about what you actually, and Maoz a little more obliquely. And I know from what both of you have written that you are absolutely, without question, working toward a future in which both Palestinians and Israelis have a safe, secure home with self-determination and dignity, right? What I don't want to get into is that one state, is it two states, it's a confederacy, how you're going to deal with it. And the reason that I don't want to deal with it is because, and you're not going to hear any answer to that today, I'm hoping, is because I think it shuts down the more important conversation, right? It's very easy once we go there to then attack any possible answer and focus on all the flaws and all the challenges. Well, it can't be one state because of this, and it can't be two states because of that. And it avoids, actually, as hard as that is to envision how this would work, I think it avoids the harder, deeper work and the harder, deeper conversation, right? And I want to say that, speaking to us, right, somehow, when there isn't a perfectly clear, flawless plan for violence, right, oftentimes we go forth anyway. Because we say, well, we have to do something. We can't just let, right? So why is it that when it comes time for peace, unless we have everything laid out in advance, right, we have this sense of, well, we can't go forward because it's naive, or because, there are all these obstacles. So I want to dive into what I think is sort of harder, and that is that some people, maybe most people, as you mentioned, stay in the rage and the desire for vengeance and the oversimplification of not only am I right, but I am 100% and exclusively right. My side is right and the other side is wrong. Even though the reality is staying in that position, in that place of being angry and frightened and in pain, causes enormous suffering, both in the actions it leads to and just holding all that anger. And you have clearly chosen a different path, right? All the people at the Parents Circle Families Forum and our congregation had heard from Rabbi Damelin many, many years ago, and we've been involved with them in various ways, right? Having lost immediate family members to violence, having suffered this much, you choose a different path. And I wondered if you could dig in a little bit about what made that possible for you. Aziz in particular, like you talked very quickly of that move from being from 10 to 18 and going to that meeting. And what enabled you to choose this path and give up vengeance? Because that is hard.
Yeah, it is very difficult. Just to paint for you my childhood, when I went to school every morning, I was afraid to go to school. My mom had to give me an onion every morning to convince me to go to school. Anybody can guess why an onion? You've never been at protests here, I can tell. Because if you fire that tear gas, onion helps you not suffocate and die. And because I was so afraid to go to school because we were fired at tear gas so often, I had to carry an onion. So I grew up with so much trauma. My brother, sadly, wasn't the only person in my family who's killed. Multiple people, cousins, uncles who were killed as well. And the same with the reality of what's happening today in the West Bank. That's how I grew up. Pogroms that were quite regular. So I had a lot of anger. And I think what I realized in the classroom when I met that teacher, two things that really made a difference for me. One, I realized that the person who killed my brother had a full control over my life. That every choice I was making, every time I chose to seek vengeance, I was being a slave to that person. And when I realized that, like, I don't want to be a slave. This person killed my brother and now controls me. Like, how much more wind do I want to give this person? And so my choice to overcome that and to seek forgiveness even, which is not everybody, even the parent circle would agree with me on this, but to me it was important, I think for Ma'oz it is not because that person deserves it. They don't. But it's because we want to be in charge. We want to be in control of my own life, not somebody else. And I want to be in charge of my own choices. Now, does that get away with the anger? And I would argue no. You can never let go of the anger. Because if somebody kills your brother, you're never going to be not angry about it. If you read the news today, you're not going to be not angry. You see the images coming out from Gaza or the West Bank, you're not going to be not angry. I would presume for most Israelis, for me even as a Palestinian, watching what happened October 7th, I was very angry. And so what do you do with that anger is the question. And something I learned from one of my mentors in this work, his name is Rabbi Hanan, who's an Israeli whose daughter was killed in a suicide bombing. And I had this conversation with him years ago, and he said, look, anger is like a nuclear power. And nuclear power, sure, it's great if we don't have it, but we do. And if you do, you have two ways you can use nuclear power. You can either create a bomb with it, which have happened before, and use it on people and cause even more pain. That's how many of us use our anger. Or you can create electricity with it and make light from it. And so it's about how we use that anger. And what we do, we say, yes, we are angry, we are upset. We're humans, we have emotions. You can't see suffering and injustice and not react to it. But instead of acting to create more suffering, we're using that anger to make sure that we can correct those mistakes, those injustices, those crimes, and that we are creating light instead of more pain.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So most people in a movement, in combatants for peace, go through transformation process. You don't get to this work if you don't go through some type of transformation. And for me personally, the transformation happened in Khair. It's a small village that is about 30 minutes from where I grew up. It's a small village that I encountered with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence many years ago, introduced to the group of activists that were forming there. And I was already working on peace, but I wasn't fully aware of the Palestinian experience and how it affects my family, the interconnectedness of that experience. So I was very angry with the occupation because of what it's doing to the Palestinians. You know, and we like to say we don't hate anyone, no human being, but the system itself. The system is the enemy, the system of oppression, the system of violence that we live under. And I was very angry with the occupation for what the occupation is doing to the Palestinians. But I was not fully aware what the occupation is doing to us, what it's doing to Israel, what it's doing to our future, what it's doing to our faith, to our tradition, to our being, to our safety. That's something that came later on for me in the transformation. What I find in general is that, and why I love this moment right now, is the only way our people are transformed from the tribal, us versus them, to the peace camp, is by talking to Palestinians. That is the catalyst to transformation that I find most often. And my mentor, Suleiman Khatib, who co-founded Combatants for Peace after serving in Israeli jail and finding nonviolence. Not just nonviolence as a way to deal with the conflict, but nonviolence is a way of life. Nonviolence is a profound belief in everything we do. And to see somebody, honestly, living under occupation, where their home is threatened, their neighbors' homes are demolished, they have no rights to do anything. They have no citizenship, they can't move freely. Everything they do depends on the whims of a soldier, this or other, every single thing. But Suli is free. And his freedom is deeply inspiring, that he can be free, and despite all of that, commit himself to peace. That was profound. Going through this difficulty, when you see your transformation, Aziz, many people in our movement, Ahmed Khilo, who lost 70 people in Gaza.
The noon whistle.
The noon whistle. And he's still committed to freedom. What gives him the strength to do that? The strength of a experience with the other. When the other, like Aziz said, stops being the other and starts being the us. And that's the process I went through, and many in our movement go through, and I encourage you to go on. It's very, very freeing and liberating, given that both people are deeply, deeply traumatized and are still under ongoing violence. And in Israel, there's a coup. In Gaza, there's mass killing still going on. In the West Bank as well. Giving all of that, it's a very liberating path we're on that allows us to keep doing this despite the violence that we're exposed to.
Yeah. I wanted to lift up something in the book that really struck me and made me aware of my own kind of reaction to things. And you talked, Aziz, about how hard it was for you and your father to go to Yad Vashem, to learn about the Holocaust, and to really take in that reality. And I'm so aware of how hard it is for so many Jews to hear or say the word Nakba. Right? It's like you raise the issue of sort of betrayal and loyalty, right? That somehow recognizing that the other's experience of profound suffering is real, right? And for us, I think, I was really thinking about why it is so hard for Jews to be able to use the word Nakba and to recognize that what we may celebrate as the fulfillment of a dream of millenniums, and a moment of perceived safety after trauma, was for other people an utter complete trauma and disaster, and that those two things can both be true. Right? How do you do that work of helping people to to hold multiple truths without feeling like if I recognize that your story is true, that must mean my story is somehow not true, or that my pain is not important, or that something is excused, or that, right? Like tachlis, like how do you really get into that with people and help them begin that path? Because it's very countercultural, and it feels to me as a rabbi it should not be. Right? We should know how to do this.
You're right. I mean, I was thinking if we take the Bible and we open to the first 3 chapters of the Bible, there are 2 stories of creation that don't really fit with each other. I'm sure religious scholars will explain how they eventually do, but mainly because of this enlightenment is everything has to be one narrative and one story to everything. But even in the Bible, you have many stories that kind of tells you different perspectives, and it's okay to live with contradictions first. I think if anything, both religious texts, I would argue Islamic religious text is similar. And Christian, you have 4 accounts of the life of Jesus, and they don't always match perfectly, and people were okay with it. This is very recent, the whole concept that it's everything needs to be perfect. This is honestly why we created Meshdi, is this concept I realized when I went to study Hebrew. I realized it's not that my narrative isn't true, it's that it's not complete. And as I hear other narratives, it gives me more wholesomeness, understanding of what other people think. I won't always accept everything I hear, but it's important to do that. And this is true not only in Israel and Palestine, this is true in America. This is why the same thing exists in Northern Ireland. If you go to Northern Ireland, hear a Catholic and a Protestant tell their stories, it's very different. You go to the Balkans, you go to South Africa, you have the colored, you have the black, you have the white, you have the Afrikaans, you have all these different, and if you only hear one person's story, you're missing out significantly of what happened. And so for me, I grew up not knowing anything about the Holocaust, not thinking it didn't happen. I didn't know anything, period. It was not part of my education system. And I remember first, I was going to my Hebrew class, and there was a siren. And this is a siren which people stand to honor those who were killed in the Holocaust. I didn't know that. So suddenly, you can imagine, walking here in East Hampton, and suddenly you hear a siren, every car stops, people get out of it and just stand still. People walk in the street, stand still. People in their shops working suddenly stand still, and you have no idea why this is happening. And if you 18-year-old going through that, it's a freaking out experience. And because I love sci-fi, I'm a huge fan of a guy named Isaac Asimov books, I was fully convinced, and not a joke, really fully convinced that we were under alien attack. It's like they've come, I've read a couple of books about this mind control stuff, and the siren is basically mind control. The good news, it was up to me to save the world, because I wasn't under this mind control. And so I ran to my Hebrew class. I was freaking out. I'm like, oh goodness, I don't know how to save the world. I ran to my Hebrew class. I arrived just as the siren ends. And I walk in, and my Hebrew teacher is there, and she was moving, and I'm like, thank God, it'll be me and her saving the world. Which, by the way, I pitched this to James Cameron as a film. I had 5 minutes with him, and I got to pitch it to him. I'm like, listen, I have a good story. It doesn't have to be always a white male who saves the world. A Palestinian and a Jewish woman, it sounds like a good story, right? He did not buy it. But she explained to me then about what was going on. And that's why I went to the Holocaust Museum. And honestly, on the way to there, I almost turned back maybe a dozen times. Every few minutes, I'm like, nah, nobody wants me there. I've never heard of a Palestinian going to the Holocaust Museum at that point. I get there, and there's a group of soldiers with guns standing outside. I'm like, nope, I'm not going in. And so every step of the way, I had many reasons not to go in. And some of it, a lot of it is psychological. But as soon as I got in, it changed everything. And I ended up writing an article for Haaretz about my experience. And in that article, I decided to do something that I think would help answer your question. I decided, you know what, I write a lot about the occupation, I write a lot about injustice, I write a lot about what Israel is doing to us. In this article, I will do none of that. I'm gonna only talk about what I felt like and what I learned from. And that's all I did in that article. And suddenly I started getting all these unbelievable responses from people who read it. Things like, I read your article, I was amazed you did this, and it made me think, I've never done something similar. What can I do to learn the Palestinian narrative? What can I do to learn about Nakba? What can I do to understand your story? And I think this is part of what we have to do is, sometimes it's not all about, in Israel they call it Hasbara, it's not always about only explaining our side of the story. There's also the part about listening. And sometimes when we listen, people are willing to listen. And that's the experience I've had in going and learning. But it also made it so much easier for me to talk to an Israeli, to a Jewish person, understanding that trauma. Without it, I wouldn't be able to have those conversations and knowing where people are coming from. And I think for Jewish communities, if you don't understand the trauma of Nakba, if you don't understand the trauma of what's happening in Gaza and us, of the fear, of the pain, dialogue becomes impossible almost. We have to understand where each of us are coming from emotionally.
So I grew up Israeli. I knew nothing about the Nakba. I heard the name here and there, but I knew nothing about it. We started doing, so we do the joint memorial ceremony for the last 20 years. About 7 years ago, we started, because, a conversation in the movement, Yom HaZikaron is where the Israeli Jews mark their day of mourning. Nakba Day is when Palestinians do. So a conversation started, why don't we do a joint Nakba ceremony? It took some time, and we are at the 7th year. I highly recommend you watch the joint Nakba ceremony. And to prepare for the ceremonies, we did trips to learn about the Nakba, go to the places where the villages were expelled, learn what happened at the time, and all that. And one of the Israeli participants rejected the premise, this is not our history. He said, I live in this land, and I need to know the Nakba is also my history, what we did, how it unfolded. So in order to understand where we live, I need to understand my own history, which includes the Nakba. And it was a proud moment for me to say, it's not your history, it's all of our history. To understand what happened in the land, in the traumas, the deep generational trauma, you need to understand both things. And when you look at events in the land, if you really want to know what's going on, you have to, and it's a muscle you have to develop, is look at it through the Israeli and Palestinian perspectives to understand what's actually happening. And of course, both societies themselves are extremely complex. In our movement, the disagreements are not always, or often not between Israelis and Palestinians, are between some Israelis and Palestinians and some other Israelis and Palestinians. So obviously, it's all super complex. But what I want to say, to me as an Israeli, what landed the most, what took me a while to get, that the Nakba is ongoing. These violence you see in the settlements, they're part of the ongoing Nakba. They're removal of these villages in Mesafariata, Jordan Valley, even in Jerusalem, in neighborhoods in Sheikh Jarrah or Silwan. These are continuing processes of removing Palestinians from their land. So what we see as our first priority of peace building is to stop that. Stop removing Palestinians from the land. We cannot build peace in a future where we're safe and free if we keep removing Palestinians from the land. There's an Israeli election. We hope the next government will stop this horrendous thing. But that is me, an Israeli, not understanding the conversation. If I don't understand the Nakba is ongoing, that 48 stuff is ongoing still right now for many Palestinians, definitely in the psyche and definitely as part of the occupation. That changes how you talk about peace. So that's why Nakba is so important.
So you take me right to the next question I was going to ask, which maybe you partly answered already, and that is that we're all very, very good at pointing out the obstacles to peace on the other side, right? They do this and they do that. And I wanted to ask first you, Gili, maybe that's your answer already, and then Aziz. What do you see within Israeli society, actions, beliefs, ways of being, that for you as an activist are the biggest obstacles to peace? And then the same question to you within the Palestinian community. Like, what's holding us back on our side, each of us?
I think the main thing and the central thing is the dehumanization of Palestinians. I grew up, I never encountered Palestinians not as violent threat in the media, in the conversation. The way I meet the Palestinian experiences in Israeli is as violence. Violence to me. I think if you live under occupation, you meet experience of Israelis as violence. So there's a process of dehumanization where the other is just a source of violence and a source of hate and a source of a threat. And what the process is to untangle it and also connect. It was very hard, and before the October 7th, during the judicial coup, we made great progress in connecting the occupation to Israeli democracy, to the threat to Israeli democracy. To say what many said before, but never quite penetrated society, that the system of occupation, what Yeshayahu Leibovich screamed on Israeli TV almost every week until he died, that the Israeli occupation, that system that was created to control Palestinians, will eventually come at all of us, because it's not democratic, and it's violent, and violence expands. And the people that come out of there will enslave us all. He was a prophet of doom, he was a prophet of them. And making that connection to the society, that what happens to Palestinians directly affects us. It's not separated. So we made a great, I think, with Looking Occupation in the Eye, a great campaign. But October 7 traumatized the society to such an extent that these conversations became impossible. We hope that now we can make them more mainstream. And this book, because it was on Jon Stewart, managed to get us into more popular culture outside of the political bubbles, and hopefully start a larger conversation. It's going to be in Hebrew and Arabic. It's in the process. Hopefully that's another way to get it to changing the system.
French, Italian, German,
wow,
all fun languages. Portuguese. I think it's similar. I think there is definitely the view most Palestinians only encounter with Israelis is soldiers. And so the image you have of Israel is only the occupation. And for me, like I said, I was 18 first time I met an Israeli who treated me like a human being. So that's definitely an obstacle. But I would also say our governance is an obstacle. We have not had an election in Palestine in 20 years. So in my lifetime, I don't have chances of electing leaders. You mentioned me being a politician, a very failed. And the people I was talking to from my pursuit to get in politics in Jerusalem by both the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, which the reason the Palestinian government stopped me was corruption. This is a leadership that's much more concerned with its own, lining its own pockets than it is actually interested in the Palestinian people. Now that often people use that to say that's why the occupation should remain, which I find crazy, because I think that in some ways Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli government kind of help each other out. They both use the other as a reason why we must have them. Oh, we cannot have election now because of Israel. Well, Netanyahu needs to stay in power because of Hamas. And Hamas needs to stay in power because who else is going to fight against the Israeli occupation? They all use each other, and that is an obstacle. It's these reasonings. You cannot create peace with the logic of war. It's just not possible. We using too often the same logic that justifies war for peacemaking. This is how the Iran war was launched. We used the logic of war to say, But the goal is peace, and now a few months later, we are realizing how ridiculous that whole argument is, but it's exactly the argument being used in this on Palestine. But also, both of us are American citizens. And I would say we have to also look at home here, because I would argue if the US government was pro-peace, and I would put Democrats and Republicans together, that's not a Republican problem, it's not a Democrat problem, both have not been helpful. And as somebody who's met with the administrations during the last 20 years, we have a serious problem here. Either a disengagement, like the Biden administration was until October 7th, or a complete lack of understanding, bias, idiocy, really unbelievable idiocy. Some of the meetings, I can not maybe go into details, but some of the meetings we've had with people from the administrations or Congress, you can't believe these are the people voting on our lives, with how ridiculous it was. And so we have to also take responsibility here in the US and say, how much are we pushing our own politicians to create peace? Clinton didn't go and negotiate a peace agreement in Northern Ireland because he woke up one day and decided, I'm gonna be a good guy and bring peace to Northern Ireland. He did it because the community, the Irish community in America, told him, you better do this. And that's when he went to George Mitchell and sent him and gave him the authority and the power to do it. When Obama sent George Mitchell to Israel and Palestine, he didn't give him the same backing Clinton gave to Mitchell in Northern Ireland. And eventually an agreement was signed. And guess what? It wasn't signed by peace-loving, leftist, bleeding heart, pro-peace people. The two people who met at the White House to do the agreement, to celebrate the agreement, is David Trimble and Jerry Adams. I think some of you might remember those times. These are not known as peace activists, so much so. David Trimble refused to shake hands with Jerry Adams even at the ceremony of the Good Friday Agreement. He refused to shake hands with him until the day he died. And yet an agreement was achieved. America has a lot of abilities to get us there, and we have to look in the mirror and not only say, well, those Palestinians and those Israelis are not doing it. It's Netanyahu and it's Abu Mazen and it's Hamas. It's also us here in America.
So I actually wanted to ask you about the American culture. I have argued, and I'm wondering whether you think I'm right or off base, that that there's been a sort of a massive failure of leadership in the American Jewish community that has been, especially since, but long before October 7th, that has been churning fear and rage and not doing the pastoral work necessary to lead people to the kind of work that you were doing, number one. Number two, that the virulence of the anti-Zionist movement is actually not serving the Palestinian cause well at all, because it's feeding into that narrative that Jews are being attacked everywhere, and so there isn't that moderate Jewish voice advocating and pushing for a different kind of policy, and it just further and further divides. And I guess my third worry is that we have this culture now of kind of glorifying victimhood, and especially on the far progressive left, sort of this listen to victims, which is so important from a caring pastoral perspective, but unless those people are doing the deep work and the hard work that you're doing, which is about, it's emotional, it's intellectual, it's spiritual work, the most prominent voices are the most traumatized and the least helpful. So I'm wondering, like, whether you think I'm on to something, whether you think I'm off base, and what you're seeing, especially in this work here in America post-October 7th, what's happened to the discourse here, and is there a way, Do you see a path forward?
There's definitely a way forward. So, I've been challenging the Jewish community for many, many years on this idea that we can support Israel, demand that it's respected, by decoupling it from the Palestinian experience. So, the decoupling of the Israeli and Jewish safety from what's happening to Palestinians is how the establishment Jewish community would like to have this conversation. We support Israel. We have the right to support Israel actively in any way we want. And we do not have to answer for anything that happens to Palestinians. As if these are parts of two separate stories. But they're part of one and the same story that happens in the Holy Land. And they're interconnected. So using the word occupation was very problematic for a long time. But that was the reality of the land. So this idea that we can support Israel, but decouple it from the lives and experiences of Palestinians is something that the next generation will not going to accept. The next generation of young Jews that I encounter every day that are rejecting this idea, that it's somehow what Israel is doing to the Palestinian is not part of the Jewish story. And I would say the same thing in parts of the Palestinian. Of course, it's not monolithic, right? Jewish community is broad, it's diverse, it's beautiful, and there's a lot of great innovation in how we talk about this. The same in the Palestinian solidarity movement. There are people who want to decouple Israeli pain and Israeli suffering, Israeli Jewish suffering, from the struggle for freedom. So, Suri likes to say, and it's a controversial saying in some spaces, many spaces, that both the occupier and the occupied both have to be freed from this violence. And Maoz likes to say that, they promised us these big fences and big militaries, they'll keep us safe, but they didn't keep his family safe or any of us safe. Israelis are less safe now than ever. America gave so much, bombs and weapons and cover. Israelis are less safe than ever. And to your point about that photo in Congress, what Aziz and Maoz did in Congress is they provided an alternative to the Netanyahu speech. It happened at the same time that Netanyahu spoke in Congress, advocating for war and hate and security through racism and more militarism. And they provided at the same time for members of Congress who reject that, because they know that here, that doesn't work. And what they told members of Congress is such a beautiful moment. If you want peace, invest in peace. Look how much money you give in bombs. And look how much money you give in peace. And it's self-evident why we are in the place that we are. So America and American Jews and the Palestinian diaspora in the United States have enormous amount of role, a huge role, critical role, to play in bringing about a better future for both Israelis and Palestinians. That culture is not fully developed yet. We're very segregated. Jews and Muslims in America over Palestine, definitely American Jews and Palestinian Americans. So cultivating this work, building personal connections, and starting to build a culture that advocates for everyone. And some politicians start saying that, and my ear is super sensitive, that both Israeli Jews and Palestinian, free Palestinians, will decide whatever they decide. But they both have to be free, and we both have to talk about the both of them when we speak. When we start decoupling our safety from each other, none of us will be safe. Without equating the asymmetries of power. In peace world, in Israel-Palestine, the asymmetries of power and privilege have to be present in order for us to have a real conversation in a real community. Just because the system privileges us, me as an Israeli Jew, versus my Palestinian partners who enjoy rights based on the tier of where they live, versus Jews who enjoy the same rights no matter where they live. So that has to be part of the conversation. But a lot of work to be done, and needed to be done.
I think leadership has failed miserably. There is much more focus on us as a Jewish Muslim than us together. And this war going on is kind of my community is suffering here in America, and therefore I have to attack your community, is increasing both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. It doesn't help either. And in reality, those who hate Muslims often hate Jews. They might just decide it's more strategic today to hate Muslims than Jews, and then we'll switch later. And those who hate Jews often hate Muslims because they see us both as invaders, as not really belonging in America. I live in the South, I know it. So we have to come together and understand this is absolutely stupid. The money being spent on hate in this country is absurdity. And some of it coming from people in our own communities. It's just, I cannot fathom this mindset. I was in a meeting with people who are important in the community, including with some presidents of universities. And we're talking about anti-Semitism. And I told them, and I stand by this, it is quite dumb to focus on anti-Semitism without Islamophobia. I think we should work together and say Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is not acceptable in our communities, and us going together to those communities and work together. And I was told this is absolutely insulting. It's only insulting if you don't realize how important it is for us to be allies. Instead, this is only me, and I need to work. And then they surprise they don't have partners. And so when I talk, I do a lot of work on Islamophobia, and I always talk about anti-Semitism in my work in Islamophobia because I think they go always together and should go always together, and building those allies. But also a lot of the things that hurts our work in Israel and Palestine connected to that. The US cut all funding to Israeli-Palestinian peace work, 100%. $50 million used to be spent on that, which still, in my opinion, is considering to the tens of billions going to weapons, is ridiculous. But the member of Congress who was in charge of making sure this happened is a person who has a big Jewish constituency, and he justified it by saying, my constituencies say they don't want it to happen. Now, I don't believe his constituency came and told him that, but this is how he did it. He said, the Jews don't want it, that's why I didn't do it. That's why I'm stopping it. He's from here, New York. That's where we have to come together, because how is peace work suddenly a bad thing for America? By the way, today in the United States, and this is something we should be working on together, Palestinians cannot get visas anymore to come to America. It's impossible to get a visa. If my family want to visit me, they can't get a visa to come here to visit me. This is US law now, or US executive order. It's an absolute absurdity. Peacemakers who are able, like myself, who are even US citizens, every time I go in and out of the country, I'm interrogated for hours about my peace work. I just came back from a trip last week. The amount of scrutiny I had to go through for being a peacemaker is unbelievable. Everything in my bag was searched. My phone was taken away, manually searched who you're talking to. I was asked about other Palestinian peacemakers and why do I know them. I was asked about why do I support financially peace work. This is an absurdity that we should not stand for. And what I go through is nothing compared to what others go through. But we shouldn't be okay with this becoming a norm. It's not, it's in our country, and Jews and Muslims coming together have significant power. Us divided, we only hurt our own communities here, and we hurt Israel and Palestine. And unfortunately, that's what people in the establishment do not realize.
So thank you for that. The hour is late. You've been very generous, and I was going to ask you a twofold question, but I'm going to ask you just the second part of it. I was going to ask you.
You can ask both, and each of us
Okay.
has one.
Well, I was going to ask you what, if anything, brings you to the edge of despair, because I'm sure things do. But maybe we'll focus on what brings you back to the work,
okay,
and what restores your hope.
So I had a very difficult, last year, a friend, a fellow activist named Auda Hatalin was murdered in broad daylight on camera. He was not only a friend and an amazing human being, he was an incredible talent in organizing diaspora Jews, Palestinians, internationals, in doing solidarity work, protective presence in the villages of Masafariyata that are experiencing what you see on the news. A lot of it is there, like the pogroms, and he's an extraordinary human being, and he didn't hate anybody. He didn't, despite living through this day in, day out, didn't hate anyone. He did it with love and respect, and just wanted to be treated as a human being. He was murdered in broad daylight, filmed his own murder in his own village, in his own home, shot by a known terrorist settler that the Biden administration put on some sort of list, and then Trump removed from the list, doesn't matter. And the guy was let go. And what happens now in the West Bank is there's no accountability for anything. You can do anything you want to Palestinians. The entire system doesn't hold you accountable. It's horrendous. We used to have time to call people, call somebody with a good heart, a commander or something. That's gone. So hence the American responsibility to say, to hold Israel accountable for these daily crimes. Auda was murdered. They didn't allow him, the community to mourn. They didn't allow anything. I mean, we started using a lot of pressure, and we just commemorate his memorial, and saw how his memory ignites even more of people that believe in this path. Seeing Israelis and Palestinians come together for his memorial, you know, seeing the culture that he created in its entirety, seeing support from all over the world for this village, for the family. And yesterday or the day before, the Israeli government did indict him for murder, manslaughter. For manslaughter, yeah, of course. Which is rare. Usually nobody's indicted. But the international pressure was large. A lot of people knew him. So it shows in El-Khair, in Khan al-Ahmar, in Susia, villages that are still standing, barely. The reason they're standing is because people like Auda told the story to the world, and the world reacted. And Israelis do listen. Not the Israeli public, but the government, the power. They do listen. So when Jews around the world start calling and saying, don't do this, and we have a big mobilization, they listen. And they don't. And these villages are proof of what we can do together. And that's what inspires me. People like Auda, his memory. From despair over his murder, I now think of him as a hero inspiring a generation of activists. We had a ceremony in Brooklyn. So many young Jews showed up because he affected their lives. When there were so many young Jews showed up, committed to this path with their whole lives and souls and their Judaism to saving these villages and saving the Palestinian people, because it's us. Everyone's on the line at the end.
2 months before his murder, he was denied entry in California. He was there to be hosted by the Jewish community, and he was turned back to the West Bank. Similar, I think for me, the despair part is just the reality and the fear. I just talked to my family, and the fear they live through every day is terrifying for me. My nephew was attacked by settlers, dislocated his shoulder, and the next day, though, his post on Facebook was about how he doesn't want anybody to use his pain for revenge. So that gives me hope. But I would say beyond is that collective action. This year, Combatants for Peace, Interact, and a few other organizations came together, and we said, okay, we have this attacks by settlers. We can complain online, we can complain forever. Complaining is not peacemaking. It's action. Peacemaking and hope is all about action. And so we came up with this project called Protect the Harvest. A handful of organizations came up with the idea, and then others joined. And so Protect the Harvest is encouraging people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, to come and volunteer picking olives in October and November, which you all invited to come or to sponsor somebody to come, especially young people who can't afford that. And so far we have over 100 people signed up for it. And our hope is in the next couple of weeks that 100 becomes 200, 300, 400 people, maybe even more. That's people from the United States. And then we having Israelis, and we're pushing for a drive of more Israelis to come as well and join. And in reality, if we can get a few thousand people to show up, that violence would stop. It doesn't need the majority. We don't need 1 million people. We need a few thousands. And that's, I think, the mistake many of us have. We think, oh, we need to convince 99% of people in the world so we can bring peace. No, in reality, we need to convince just enough people to be active. We have already a lot of people with us who believe in peace. Getting the people who believe to act about their faith, that's the hard part. And that's why people, again, tell us, don't speak to the converted, go to those who don't believe. No. I prefer to speak to the converted because I want those who believe in peacemaking to become active in peacemaking, whether it is themselves or to support others directly who can do it as well. And so mid-October to mid-November, this is what gives me hope, knowing that hundreds of people will show up, will be there picking olives with my family. That gives me a lot of hope.
And it's a great coalition. It's a coalition with Rabbis for Human Rights, of True New Israel Fund. It's the coalition, Sisters of Shalom Salam, standing together, all the joint organizations. The coalition building is also part of this beautiful effort.
Thank you so much for being with us, for welcoming to It's been a privilege to learn from you, to hear from you. And I'm just going to make quiz for us so we can eat. And if you're able to stay and eat, we would love that. So,
we're not going to say
Al Ken Barach Adonai Yom HaShabbat V'Yikadshehu Sabri Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Borei Pri Hagafen L'chaim u'shalom, to life and peace, l'chaim. Thank you, everybody.